Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, Russia Today news media is the target of one senator's proposed bill claiming RT is using Nazi propaganda to shift thinking in the U.S. through their news reporting. We also see China and Japan continuing their longtime rivalry with new fears things could escalate quickly. But first, the world is taking sides as more than 80 Syrian civilians appear to be killed in a chemical weapons attack. Now, the alleged perpetrators, and we do mean alleged, nothing has been proven, of the attack is Bashar al-Assad and his army. Now, this comes as King Jordan's king was headed to the United States for his second meeting with President Trump.
Interesting. And Jordan and the United States have always had pretty friendly relations in history. King Abdullah met with President Trump at the White House to talk about how to stop ISIS. At a press conference in the Rose Garden, Trump built up his Jordanian partner, as well as made mention of bringing Assad to justice for the chemical attack on Syrian civilians that had taken place just the day before. Let's take a listen.
Your Majesty, thank you for being with us today. Very much appreciated. This is our second meeting since my inauguration, but our first at the White House. Very special place, I can tell you that. I've gotten to know it well. Long hours, very special. It's really an honor to welcome you here today, but before we begin, let me say a few words about recent events. Yesterday, a chemical attack that was so horrific in Syria against innocent people, including women, small children, and even beautiful little babies. Their deaths was an affront to humanity. These heinous actions by the Assad regime cannot be tolerated. The United States stands with our allies across the globe to condemn this horrific attack and all other horrific attacks for that matter. Your Majesty, Jordanians are known for their legendary hospitality, and we will do our very best to be equally gracious hosts. They're also known, however, I have to say this, for their fighting ability, and you are a great warrior, and we appreciate it. Thank you. In King Abdullah, America is blessed with a thoughtful and determined partner. He is a man who has spent years commanding his country's special forces. He really knows what being a soldier is, that I can tell you. And he knows how to fight. The king has been a leader in calling for a plan to defeat ISIS once and for all. And I'm with you on that. We're both leaders on that, believe me. That's what we speak about today, and that is what we are going to do. And it'll be a shorter fight than a lot of people are thinking about. Believe me, we've made tremendous strides as we discussed.
Well, as you mentioned, Katan, you can see they're on the same side here.
That's right.
Well, the former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, spoke with RT about the U.S.'s decision to strike Assad's forces after it was alleged that they again used chemical weapons on their people. While the United Kingdom supports the U.S.'s decision to send missiles to bomb the region, Ford says they have delivered the verdict before deliberating on the evidence, and what needs to have happened and may yet happen is a proper UN investigation. But the damage is done, he said, and not just the immediate damage to the airport, which, by the way, was being used in the fight against ISIS.
Yeah, you can't take those missiles back after they've gone out. But he continued, what Trump's stupid action has done is make it more likely that chemical weapons will be used. Why? Because if you are a jihadist, would you not be a jihadist this morning? Would you not be planning false flag operations to make sure that more American involvement would be brought on Assad's head? Well, of course you would. And jihadists have already mounted false flag operations with chlorine, Ford said, that was documented in the UN report from August of 2016.
Well, looking at things from the perspective of the Syrian government, when asked what motivation Bashar al-Assad would have had to carry out such an attack, Ford was convinced, saying they had absolutely zero motive for doing it and 100 reasons not to do it. Only days before Trump had put an olive branch, or put out an olive branch, you know, the sign of peace there,
yep,
in their direction. It's incredible, Ford said, at all that Assad would respond with a two-finger gesture. It is literally incredible.
Well, Mr. Ford believes that jihadists and their backers are simply manipulating the situations to sway world leaders to attack the terrorist enemies instead of them. Ford compared current events with how British and American intelligence agencies accused Saddam Hussein of having weapons of mass destruction and taking him out, but they found no evidence for their claims. So, Ford said, "We're like a dog returning to its vomit."
Well, to the surprise of CNN reporter Kate Baldwin, Republican Congressman Tom Massey also could not understand why Bashar al-Assad would have used chlorine gas on his own people. Massey told Baldwin, "It's hard to know what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interest," he said. "It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further." So they're making great points.
Excellent points. Why would he terrorize his own people?
That's right.
1 point. 2, why would he continue to bring the hammer down of these international countries that are fighting against his regime, because it make matters worse for him? So it really seems like, according to what they're saying, it doesn't make tactical or practical sense. Right. Dumbfounded, Boulden further questioned the congressman, pointing out he seemed to be siding with Assad's position and what Russians were saying as well over his own colleagues in the United States and human rights observers. Well, again, Massey answered, "I don't think it would have served Assad's purpose to do a chemical attack on his own people. So it's hard for me to understand why he would do that if he did."
Also coming to the aid of the Syrian government was Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. He has strongly condemned the U.S. missile strike against Syria, which he says were carried out on, quote, bogus allegations. Mr. Zarif tweeted, "Not even 2 decades after 9/11, U.S. military fighting on the same side as Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Yemen and Syria. Time to stop hype and cover-ups."
Well, in further tweets, the foreign minister went on to say the U.S. helped former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein build chemical weapons to use against Iran during their imposed war. Now, Zarif pointed out Washington attacks Syria over the same banned arms, an obvious double standard. Iran, as a country, having been victims of weapons of mass destruction, condemns any use of chemical weapons, Zarif added.
Iran is not the only country speaking out against the U.S. decision. The Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said President Putin is calling the U.S. airstrikes an act of aggression against a sovereign country carried out using an invented pretext, he said. So, in other words, Katan, Russia is saying someone is making up reasons to retaliate against Assad to overthrow his government. Now, Moscow also says the strikes violate international law.
Furthermore, Peskov shared the UN chemical weapons watchdog has documented that the Syrian army does not have any chemical weapons at the moment. He also added that President Vladimir Putin sees the use of chemical weapons by terrorists is being ignored by the U.S. and other countries, and this is further causing the situation in Syria to deteriorate. Russia also believes the U.S. strike on Syria is a distraction for the international community to turn their attention away from the hundreds of Syrian and Iraqi civilians who are claimed to be victims of other U.S. airstrikes in the past month.
Well, our chief field correspondent, Larry McGee, has also been following this story for us and has details on the controversy brewing over the attacks. Larry, what seems to be the complaint?
The issue that many people are having stems from doubt related to the Syrian government's participation in the recent attacks. Among the most vocal opponents of the U.S.'s assertions regarding the attack is former Congressman Ron Paul, who contributed his thinking on the matter in an interview with reporters this week. The former government official says that he doesn't believe the evidence is there. And as was the case with Iraq, he believes the incident in question provided an excuse for the U.S. and its coalition partners to bomb Syria. Mr. Paul says he can't see how the attacks could conceivably be what they claim because it's helping ISIS, it's helping Al-Qaeda, and it's helping the enemy that the U.S. and its partners are supposedly fighting. On the question of why the president seemingly rushed into the attacks overnight without waiting for congressional support or further investigation, the former congressman responded that he didn't know, but from his viewpoint and analysis, there was no need to rush. He stated that there was no threat to our national security, and the current administration has to give a reason for doing these things, but there was a rush into it, and he doesn't know what the president's purpose was. The former government leader ventured to say later that it might have been to avoid debate on the topic, since the last effort to debate the subject resulted in a loss. Mr. Paul supposes that it might have then seemed necessary for the president to jump on this before people came to know what was really going on. Amid observations such as that given by the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev that the U.S.'s actions could be pushing things to the brink of a U.S.-Russian war, Ron Paul stated that that is the real danger. But for right now, in his viewpoint, he sees this as a sort of victory for the neoconservatives who have been saying Assad has to go. He noted what he sees as the hypocrisy of the U.S. in saying, on one hand, that it is fighting against terrorist groups in the region, but then on the other hand, it is carrying out attacks which strengthen those same groups. The outspoken talk show host says, all of this is why he is a proponent for the policy of U.S. non-interventionism. He says that while there are problems around the world, he does not believe that the American people and the American government should be the policemen of the world. The former statesman holds that that approach brings the U.S. more trouble, more grief, and more financial problems, and contrary to the stated purpose, it is motivated, he says, by things other than defense of the U.S. Constitution. The latest turmoil has also reportedly brought a halt to peace talks. The former congressman says he just wishes that people would demand to hear the truth before they decided to go and start another war. Leading up to the attacks, the international atmosphere was tense as media outlets reported on the use of sarin gas in Syria that resulted in the deaths of over 80 Syrian citizens. Employing nerve gas is banned by international law, and its use is categorized as a war crime. As the news circulated, President Trump said something has got to happen. That something was the controversial strike against the Syrian government that targeted a single airfield in the nation, which was asserted to be the location from which the plane that allegedly dropped the chemical weapons took off. Close to 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles were reportedly launched from ships in the eastern Mediterranean, aimed at different positions around the airfield, including hangars and fuel storage depots, and they were all coordinated to explode within the same space of 60 seconds. That was nearly 60 1,000-pound warheads, all exploding within a mere minute. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff. Back to you.
Well, this latest round of events by U.S. President Trump has definitely added more fuel to the fire. Well, as we continue forward with the conflicts among the nations, the United Nations Security Council met to discuss the recent actions of the use of force in Syria by the United States. The Bolivian representative opened with remarks concerning the matter, and let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
We'll now take statements from council members, and we will start by giving the floor to the representative from Bolivia.
Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor. and also for having convening this open meeting of the Security Council. It's vital that not only the members of our organization, but also the whole world should see that the positions of the members of the Security Council in a totally transparent way, given what has taken over recent days in Syria.
Bolivia ha solicitado la convocatoria de esta reunión preocupada por los sucesos que se han registrado en las últimas horas. Mientras el Consejo de Seguridad debatía propuestas sobre cuál iba a ser el mecanismo de investigación de los horribles ataques con armas químicas de los que ha sido testigo la humanidad. Mientras discutíamos las palabras que se iban a utilizar en una resolución que debía ser tratada por este Consejo, mientras los miembros permanentes y los miembros no permanentes planteábamos propuestas para el texto de esa resolución, Estados Unidos preparaba a su vez y ejecutaba un ataque unilateral. Los ataques con misiles, por supuesto, son una acción unilateral y representan una grave amenaza a la paz y seguridad internacional. ¿Por qué? Porque a lo largo de los últimos 70 años, la humanidad ha construido una estructura no solamente física, no solamente institucional, sino además una estructura legal. Ha construido instrumentos de derecho internacional para evitar justamente que los más poderosos ataquen con impunidad a los más débiles, para garantizar un equilibrio en el mundo y evitar, por supuesto, que hayan gravísimas violaciones a la paz y seguridad internacional. Creemos que es deber de este Consejo, pero no solamente del Consejo, de la Organización de Naciones Unidas en todos sus órganos, defender al multilateralismo. Estamos aquí para defender al multilateralismo. Hemos acordado que esta carta, la Carta de Naciones Unidas, tiene que ser respetada. Y esta carta prohíbe las acciones unilaterales. No son solamente los 15 miembros que estamos sentados en esta mesa. Nosotros representamos a los 193 estados de esta organización y a través de ellos a los pueblos del mundo. Y hemos acordado que las acciones unilaterales violan el derecho internacional. The Security Council has primary responsibility for international peace and security. That's my appeal, that everything should be handled within the framework of the United Nations Charter. The use of force is lawful only when in exercise of self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, and or when Security Council approves such action.
Well, he was certainly not shy about making those comments.
He sure wasn't.
Well, French President Francois Hollande gave supporting words to the U.S. President Trump's actions with the missile strikes in Syria, calling it a necessary response to a horrible tragedy. He also said that these actions were a response and should be considered on the international level to impose sanctions against Bashar al-Assad to prevent the future use of chemical weapons. Although not everyone in France is supporting President Trump's decision, French presidential candidate Le Pen said that Mr. Trump has said on multiple occasions that the United States would stop being the policeman in the world, but that's exactly what they did.
The Turkish President Erdogan criticized the Russian president for its support for the Syrian president following the recent chemical attacks in the war-torn country. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the chemicals were the result of an attack on a stockpile of chemical weapons belonging to the militants. Erdogan also called on President Trump to back up his words on Syria with actions. Trump also said that he was considering unilateral actions against the government of the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad.
Well, continuing on the recent missile strike on the Syrian airbase, Vladimir Stovenkov said that the attack was a flagrant violation of international law. Major General Igor Konashenkov said that the missile attack on the Sherat airfield violated Russia's agreement to cooperate with the U.S. in the fight against ISIS.
Regarding that attack in Syria by the alleged use of chemical weapons, so far, Jeff, as you already mentioned, 80 people have been killed as a result. Now, again, that attack was blamed on Assad and his regime, but keep in mind that the U.S. led an airstrike in Mosul recently that killed over 200 people. Now, in both cases, the governments claimed that terrorist munitions had been targeted. The Syrian attack attracted international media attention and criticism from Western officials, but surprisingly, the Mosul attack led by the U.S., United States, and their coalition, it went virtually under the radar. Nobody really knew about it.
Well, there's tensions in the East China Sea over 8 islands that are controlled by Japan, but China contests their ownership. Now, those islands uninhabited as they are close to shipping lanes, rich fishing resources, and close to potential oil and gas reserves. Now, China had been flying its military jets in Japan's airspace, and Japan is now doubling its military response.
Experts say that the risk of an accidental confrontation between the two countries is rising and could draw in other countries like the U.S. Well, these tensions will more than likely become a focal point of talks between the U.S. president and Chinese president at an upcoming meeting between the two very soon. This dispute over the islands could, of course, they're saying, trigger a much bigger conflict.
And as far as that the accident, we hear a lot about that they're saying a war can be accidentally started. That's kind of a crazy thought, but hear more and more about that.
That's right.
Well, is RT News tied to the Nazis? Well, some might think so, as this latest attack against the news organization comes from a U.S. senator from New Hampshire as she took to the Senate floor for the purpose of, quote, exposing RT to America, claiming that RT somehow hides its funding. Now, public records found on the internet show that RT has a network of stations, including RT America, that is controlled by the Russian government.
Yeah. Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire wants to propose a bill for the United States Justice Department to investigate foreign media organizations for potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act and to compel them to disclose their funding. Well, this would include agencies such as, of course, RT, BBC, Al Jazeera, and so forth, as they are funded by their country of origin. But Senator Shaheen targeted RT specifically because she said that Russia is an adversary to the United States.
In her address on the Senate floor, she said the Foreign Agents Registration Act was created in the 1930s in response to concerns about Nazi propaganda being disseminated in the U.S. without people knowing what it was, and this is appropriate today to take a look at what Russia and other countries may be doing to our news.
Well, in her address, she cited foreign news agencies, particularly RT, of false reporting. Although the examples that she used, such as the one regarding the CIA wiretapping Trump Towers, was cited, that article that RT presented in their news source was actually sourced from ABC News. Now, ABC News is a United States news network, but nothing was said by Shaheen about ABC News in her accusations of RT bringing those false reports. Some might say that RT is not as critical against the Russian government, but that's a far cry from accusing it of false reporting. And that was a quote from one of their reporters, Guyan Chichikan, saying that, that might be so, but we're not reporting false news to the public. Well, war is on the horizon, and words are the precursor to the actions that will bring us and this entire planet to the brink of destruction. There's no solution for mankind in the way that he's going now. From the leaders to the youngest person, everyone is suffering from a lack of positive character education. Well, President Trump may have offered an olive branch to others in an effort for peace, but you can't truly have peace unless you grasp hold of the chosen branch, Yisrael Hawkins. Well, he and the House of Yahweh has the peaceful solution that the world needs, a solution that can actually stop all wars. Intrigued? Well, contact the House of Yahweh to find out more.
And when you do, don't forget to request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. Don't forget, you can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can email them at info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, please call the number that's on your screen. And once again, we'd like to remind you of two great Bible study tools on the market today. You can learn about the Yisrael Says program by going to www.yisraelsays.com and learn about the Ask Yisrael program by going to www.askyisrael.com. You will certainly be glad you did.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, the man who is called the branch, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.